Hello, welcome to a special edition of Black Nouveau. I'm Joanne Williams. Crispus Attucks is noted in most history books as the first American to die for freedom. His death in 1770 at the Boston Massacre is considered the first casualty of the Revolutionary War. Since then, African Americans have fought for this nation, while at the same time being denied rights they were fighting to preserve. This week, we salute 3 Wisconsinites who proudly served in the United States military. We'll also talk with an historian about the impact of their service on our struggle for freedom. The men and women who served in World War II have been called the greatest generation, but not all of them received the recognition and the thanks they deserved. That's true of our first veteran, who had to wait 3 generations to be honored for her service.
It's been almost 70 years since Anna Mae Wilson Robertson left the U.S. Army. Private Anna Wilson, that is. The medals have probably been waiting in a drawer at the Department of Defense for almost 7 decades.
So now you have these medals, finally.
Finally.
It's been quite a wait.
Yes.
Why so long, do you think?
I don't know. I just wonder why they just now decide to give up. I didn't know whether they had tried to get in touch with me or they got lost in the mail some kind of way or something. I don't know. I don't know why. No one ever told me.
Now they have been given to their rightful owner, Anna Mae Wilson Robertson. She was 90 years old in March of 2014. It seemed like the Army had forgotten her, but with help from Congresswoman Gwen Moore, Private Wilson, with her family and friends around her, was awarded her medals in April. She was born in Arkansas and entered the Army as a very young woman. The war was on, but she had suffered a personal family loss.
Did you enlist?
Yes, I did.
Why?
Oh, my mother died. And I had no one to take care of us, so I decided I would go into the Army, and my brother, he went into the Navy. And so rather than to stay around and just live from one person to another person, I decided I would go into the Army.
Did you know anything about the Army when you enlisted?
No, not one thing.
What did you learn fast?
We had a lot of basic training. You had lots of changes, doing different this or doing that, going here and going there, living so many different places where you had lights or you didn't have any lights.
Were you concerned about having to go into the Army during a war?
No. I wasn't, because I wasn't, like an enlisted man. He would be on the line where they had the shooting. We never did see any shooting, any guns. No, we never had any guns.
Private Wilson was assigned to the all-female, all-black 6888, the Special Postal Unit. Black women were allowed to do very little in the Army. They could be nurses or postal workers. The Army wanted to keep morale high on the battlefield, and letters from home would do the job. The mail from America was piling up in England, and the 6888 was brought in to fix the problem.
Your unit, all African-American women, moved the mail.
Yeah.
What did you think of that assignment?
It did all right. They always had some way that they could manage to get the work done.
I understand that you're a group got it done in half the time.
Yeah, this willing workers, they could.
During those years in England and France, she got to know dozens of women from many different places, and some from close to home.
You must have met women from all over the world, literally.
I did. I met one from Milwaukee.
You met one from Milwaukee?
Yes.
Did you stay in touch with her?
Yes. I was discharged. I went to Detroit, Michigan, and I stayed in touch with her, and I came back here for her wedding. She was getting married, and I came back for her wedding. And I went back to Detroit, and I decided I liked Milwaukee, and I came back. Then I went back to Detroit.
She married Milwaukeean Dan Robertson, had 8 kids, and among other places, worked at the VA hospital. From Arkansas to England to France to Michigan to Milwaukee, Anna Mae Wilson Robertson served her country. She is also a member of the greatest generation that served America during World War II. And now she has the medals to prove it.
Historian Robert Smith from UWM joins us now. You've looked at the Black experience during war. World War II, when the men and women came back, they had faced something very different overseas than they faced when they got home, right?
Absolutely. In some ways, some Black troops experienced more freedoms overseas in dealing with nations that didn't have the same type of race relationships or codification of racism and racial inequality as we have in the U.S. In other ways, they, of course, experienced the same kinds of racism abroad as they face at home.
When these veterans came back home, what did they do?
Well, you know, in fact, if we go back to World War I, we see something very important happening with Black veterans. Particularly with World War I, we see the emergence of the high-ranking officers. We see for the first time a significant number of Black officers out of the military. And this leads to a very important set of outcomes, one of which is associated with the legal campaign to end Jim Crow. One of our most important historical figures was a Black officer, Charles Hamilton Houston, who goes on to be the mentor to Thurgood Marshall. And so by World War II, Black veterans have become very aware of their role in advancing the struggle for Black equality. One
of the things that came out of World War II is the GI Bill, which helped a lot of people move into education and into homes. Did it help African Americans the same way? To some degree. Of course, World War II is important because the Black freedom struggle more broadly demands that there be both a victory abroad over fascism and a victory at home opposite racial fascism here in the United States, the WWII campaign. And so as Black soldiers are returning home, they are benefiting from the GI Bill and its various components, but they still face a significant amount of racism associated with those benefits. And in particularly, the way that these opportunities are meted out, they're meted out at the state and local levels. And so the racism is faced locally as folks attempt to get jobs and get homes. And as these returning GIs used the bill to try and improve their lives, was it successful? It was indeed successful for many of them. A number of Black veterans go to college for the first time. A number of them become homeowners. A number of them get jobs associated with their veteran status. In fact, I have a very personal story. I come from a military family. My grandfather was one of those Black veterans. He became a postman as a result of his veteran status. He owned his first home and paid it off in 10 years. He worked a double. You know, he was working a double as a postman years before they were using cars. That home is still the single most important asset to my most nuclear family, the nuclear family that I'm most directly connected to. There are a number of wonderful stories of Black veterans benefiting from the GI Bill. But of course, there was still racism in that process. The era of the Vietnam War was a time of social upheaval in the United States. Civil rights battles, anti-war protests dominated the news. What did not dominate the headlines, though, were the problems facing veterans as they returned from the battlefront. Our next profile is of a veteran who served his time overseas and is still helping veterans make their transition back home.
Brigadier General retired Robert Cocroft spent 40 years in the U.S. Army and Army Reserves before retiring from active duty in 2006. Cocroft now fights for veterans' rights as the president and CEO of the Center for Veterans Issues, which he founded in the mid-1980s.
It's been a wild ride. It's been a journey.
Located on Court Street, just north of downtown Milwaukee, the Center for Veterans Issues provides a resource center to help veterans obtain their military records, receive health care benefits, and provides access to employment and housing.
CVI's mission primarily is to act as advocacy on behalf of veterans and to create, programs to address the concerns and issues of veterans. We operate a claims service so that we can actually develop claims for a veteran to receive their benefits from the VA, get their award letters, and/or they apply for disability claims or non-service connected pensions and other benefits through the VA. One of the first issues that CVI started to address was the issue of homelessness. In Milwaukee, on any given night, you have between 200 and 250 homeless veterans. Most of them are sheltered, but they're homeless. Around 50% of all homeless veterans were African American. But the number one issue that most veterans are confronted with upon leaving the military is finding a job.
The center serves veterans in Milwaukee, Racine, Appleton, Madison, and Green Bay, Wisconsin. CVI recently broke ground on a 50-apartment housing unit and support services facility in Green Bay.
All of the units are subsidized. They're being subsidized by the city of Green Bay. It's been built in an area that has a significant veteran population, but few or not enough veteran services.
The Veterans Administration nationally has received a great deal of criticism for its handling of veterans' affairs. Cocroft understands the situation from both the managerial and veteran side and offers his opinion on how to administer VA services.
Overall, the VA does a relatively good job. The VA here, there's a Blocky Medical Center, gets fairly high marks for the provision of services. One of the things that the VA can do is to open up their processes and allow providers, medical providers, other contractors to assist in the mission, and don't always try to internalize the entire mission, because the mission is too large for one entity, and that's what creates bureaucracy. I believe there are some changes that need to be made, and they need to be made now.
Cocroft was born in Mississippi but was raised in Milwaukee, having attended North Division High School and college in Oshkosh. He vividly recalls receiving his draft letter and his emotions at the time.
I was drafted in the summer of '66 with a departure date of October of '66. And yes, the letter does say, greetings, this is Uncle Sam. You've been selected by your friends and neighbors, to serve in the U.S. military, da-da-da-da-da. I remember my first thought was, no, this must be somebody else, because my friends and neighbors wouldn't do this, There was a lot of angst about going into the military in 1966. The war in Vietnam was ramping up, and a couple of our classmates who had, been killed, there in Vietnam. So it did cause, a lot of consternation having been drafted. But at the same time, I come from a military family. My grandfather served during World War I with the 92nd Division in France. On my father's side, he and 4 of his brothers served during World War II. My mother's side, 1 brother served in World War II. She had another brother who served, during Korea. And so the way I pretty much looked at it was coming down to the point that now it's my turn, so.
Before reporting to duty, his father called upon him to seek a leadership role.
But before I left, my father told me, he said, if you get a chance to go to OCS, why don't you? And I said, yeah, okay, but the truth is I didn't know what OCS was. I found out later OCS stood for Officer Candidate School, and that you could become an officer if you tested out high enough.
Cocroft was literally on his way to Vietnam, but fate stepped in and his combat time was instead spent in Korea.
But 4 hours from flight time, I was pulled off of orders and diverted to, after a couple of months, diverted to the Republic of Korea. So I served my overseas time in Korea. I came back to Milwaukee. I still had not finished my degree, so I came back to go to school, and I did. I started school at UWM. I was also introduced to the Interested Veterans of the Central City, IVOC. I became involved with IVOC while going to school because of the conditions that veterans were confronting back here in the United States. And there was a sentiment in the country that was not favorable to the returning Vietnam veterans. In fact, we were looked down on, blamed for the war. Let me stop and say this. The veterans of Vietnam, the soldiers of Vietnam, did what they were asked to do. They never lost one major tactical engagement. They won them all. So they did what the nation asked them to do.
General Cocroft was honored in New York by the National Association of Black Veterans for being one of the organization's founders and for his dedication to fight for veterans' rights.
For many years, I served as the national commander for the National Association for Black Veterans. And so for my years of service, they thought it fitting that I be recognized.
As we recognize Veterans Day this year, the Center for Veterans Issues and the National Association of Black Veterans have joined forces to ensure veterans are remembered and acknowledged for their service to the United States of America.
There will always be those who take up arms, for the defense and safety, of the majority. As we go about our daily lives, Wisconsinites should remember that, and that those who served are Americans first. And they serve to provide the freedoms and liberties that we all enjoy.
Let's talk about a different era where veterans served the United States during Vietnam. That was a turbulent time. What kind of impact did that have on our communities?
A very different story than what we see stemming from World War II. Vietnam impacts black communities in devastating ways. Not only do we see this significant increase in the numbers of young black men brought into the war effort, as a result of that war effort, we see a significant returning with post-traumatic stress syndrome. We see a significant spike in drug addiction associated with the stints that the young men are doing over in Vietnam. We also see black men return not to the fanfare that the veterans of World War II returned to, but instead we see young men returning to a very turbulent United States. I mean, we are still in the midst of the 1960s, and of course there's the black freedom struggle that peaks. There are all kinds of other rights-related movements that are also peaking at the same time. The nation itself is in a number of upheavals, and in a lot of ways, Vietnam War protests are central to that moment as well, and black veterans get caught up in a whole range of those social and political outcomes.
What did that do to our Vietnam veterans when they came home and they found protesters saying they didn't like the war and they shouldn't have gone and were seemingly angry at the people who went to serve?
Well, there's some folks who argue that was a significant contributor to the varying forms of stress associated with the traumas of war. Not only the physical impact of war and the emotional impact of war, but the moment where folks are returning home, not to a warm welcome, but instead to accusations of being baby killers. This is a very, very different experience for the United States in terms of this military expedition.
What about drugs? There were drugs used in Vietnam, and when they came home, then what?
There was quite a bit of drug use during the war, and obviously there's well-documented evidence of that drug use and that drug addiction and the flow of drugs following veterans as they return home. Not only black veterans, but all veterans are experiencing a whole range of these challenges. Black veterans, of course, then are also returning to cities where we start to see a significant decline in the industrial base. So whereas in the 1940s and 50s, veterans are returning home to what seemed to be brimming employment opportunities, that's not the case by the 1960s and 1970s. The United States is entering a very steep industrial decline. And in a lot of ways, the folks who were a part of the Vietnam War are not only experiencing emotional and physical trauma, but they're also returning to cities where there are less employment opportunities.
Well, I want to thank you very much for talking with us, Professor Robert Smith from UWM, who's Associate Professor of History, talking about the impact of war on African Americans over several generations. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Our next veteran served in Desert Storm and Desert Shield. Now she's a vice principal in a Milwaukee public school.
Okay, well, it looks like I'll have to take you up there and try to negotiate you back in class. But when I get to the door, I want to be the only person talking. I don't want you to say anything, okay? If you say anything, the deal is off. Did you guys need to go to VFZ? Okay. Well,
Assistant Principal NeBritt Herring's day is full of putting out fires and stopping into classrooms to check up on folks and to make sure things and students are all right. Her training prior to her educational training started with someone else, her mother, putting out a fire.
And I re-enrolled in school at UW Milwaukee in the fall of '85 and had an unsuccessful year at going to college. Not really prepared for school and not really taking it serious, lack of discipline. And they asked me to not return. And so my mom decided that it wasn't going to be feasible for me to just sit in her house and do nothing. And so she suggested that I follow up with the military. And I was slow about doing it, so she actually invited a recruiter, Army recruiter, to the house. And the rest is history.
And that history started with Herring serving in the Persian Gulf. She participated in Desert Shield and Desert Storm campaigns. 200,000 or 15% of today's military is made up of women, as opposed to over 40,000 deployed during the Persian Gulf War. Operations Desert Shield and Desert Storm saw more women in the military than any other conflict in U.S. history.
My military specialty was military finance, and so I was a part of a finance unit, and we dealt with currency exchange while we were there. We did some minor pay adjustments, and we served on a mobile pay team, and we just kind of traveled around throughout the desert to exchange currency, take care of military pay adjustments and things of that nature for the soldiers on the front lines and then the support of the front line.
She did not see any combat, but was located in several different places in Saudi Arabia. She was stationed for a few months at the port of Daman.
And then from there we moved up to a location that I don't really remember, but it was in the middle of the desert. And then from there we took our assignments out to different locations, basically grid coordinates to the soldiers that were servicing the front lines and then the support of the front lines.
When she began in the military, it was peacetime, and she enjoyed that.
Wartime, didn't really expect to be a part of any of that, so that transition was difficult, but bearable.
What was it like for you during the wartime?
Stressful, just because I don't think I had a very big picture of what was going on, where I was actually being sent. So a lot of researching on maps, trying to identify exactly where Saudi Arabia was located and Kuwait, and then to understand some of the history about what was going on. So that was stressful to abruptly have to end my life here in the States as a peacetime soldier and become a part of a wartime mission. And then just the actual transition of moving to a desert, having to live outside in some conditions that were less than feasible for women to actually live in. But you know, we were trained and we were prepared to expect that, and just not on a long scale or over a longer length of time. So it wasn't so bad once we got used to it. We lived in tents, in open bays, so men and women in tents together, large tents. So we slept on cots, and we pretty much had our personal belongings in a small section of the tent. Shower and bath facilities, substandard outhouse type facilities, a box with an open screen so people could see you while you were taking care of your business, walking by. And daily we had a duty where we actually had to remove the containers where the human waste was, and to drive them out to an undisclosed location in the desert, dig a hole, bury it, and burn it. And then shower facilities were Army facilities, so tented shower facilities that we actually had to walk to. So again, substandard conditions, but tolerable.
How has the service changed since you have been in, from your conversations with female vets you've talked to?
A lot more open dialogue. I think the quality of soldier that they're getting now, that they're possibly recruiting now, has a lot more education when they're coming in. So definitely a different way in which soldiers are handled, treated. I think the respect level has increased. The fact that the dialogue is two-way communication and not so much one-way directed at telling you what to do, but open dialogue about suggesting what might be the better strategy is what I hear as one of the major differences. But I think everything else, the training and preparation and the focus on wartime missions, definitely is the same.
NeBritt Herring overall thought her military experience was decent, though she didn't care for the transition from peacetime to wartime, which was the major reason for her leaving. She was put into the military for discipline, and she got it.
Discipline, time management, organization, leadership skills all came along with my participation. Opportunity to meet different people, see different places, and understand that how we view things in America is kind of slanted when you actually get out into the world and see people from other places, other countries, and interacting with them. You kind of get more of a global perspective on how we interact and how we're perceived in other parts of the world.
We want to say thank you for your service to all of our veterans. And that's our program for this week. For Black Nouveau, I'm Joanne Williams. Thanks for watching.